All right, so we've got the Celts, the Christians, and the alchemy, the alchemists. Now, whatever stream the stories, I'm going to follow them through. These some of the variations. Not all of them. I can't tell everything. I don't know everything, and I can't even tell what I do know, all of it. I'm going to try to do it with pull out some of the highlights and in a way that's understandable. All of them begin, we'll say, with a preface that tells where this object came from, what it was and where it came from. And where it came from, in all of them, all of these streams, was a time when there was a paradise. A time when all was in balance and whole. When there was fruitfulness and abundance. A time without suffering as we have come to know it in our world today. That's why I ended up with the circle and the light. We all began in that circle that was not yet broken. Now, in the Celtic version of this paradise, this is so interesting. Detroit wrote the elucidation, as well as his comments to Grail. And the elucidation tells you about where the Grail came from. And it came from a time in Britain when the king existed in a right relationship with what was called sovereignty, meaning the goddess, meaning the land. They were equal. At that time, the king could not rule without being in right relationship with the land and the goddess and the female principle. The Myth of Babylon is, such a good book to read because it really shows this. So much so, and we know this, that there was a whole ritual life that repeated itself in the cycles of the year, because also among the Celts, and this is an important thing about time and the myth, there was no linear time. It was all cyclic time, based upon the seasons. Things grow, they come into fruition, they wither, they die, they come back again, they grow, they wither, they die. And that there were rituals connected with keeping this cycle of fertility going. And they involved playing out this union of the king with sovereignty, the goddess. This paradise was called Logrish, L-O-G-R-E-S. And Logrish was the place where the women kept the sacred waters, the sacred wells. They were the keepers of the wells. And the men would come, the knights, the kings, and they would drink from the waters that the women would give them in their sacred vessels. And the men would come and drink from these waters, and by doing so, they could gain access to the other world. We would call it the spirit world. For them, it wasn't about spirits. It was all part of the same natural universe. They didn't make the distinction between spirit and matter. You could cross back and forth. That's why the Holy Grail wouldn't be part of their myth, because it's all holy, or it's all not holy. It's all part of the same thing. Nature is holy, and holy is nature, and the spirit is the physical, and the physical is spirit. What point in time is this? The Celtic scholars. When was the Celtic? I would say in
2000 BC, something like that. Really ancient.
So there's a memory of this time built into the myth. And this balance, this wholeness, that ensured fertility and abundance and peace of the land was built into the balance of the male and the female principle. The king and the goddess, and sovereignty, and her earthly representatives, which were the ladies of the well. Male principle, the male force, political power could not be exercised without her dominion. Okay. So what happens? One day, this one king decides he doesn't really like this arrangement. Here comes the soul. And he decides, we got to put a stop to this. I'm going to claim this for myself. Rapes the women. He doesn't singly rape all of them. He's got his men involved in this, the whole bunch of them. They come in one day and they rape the women, violate them, and steal the sacred vessel. That is the Holy Grail.
That the waters were in? The vessel that the waters were in.
The kingdom at that point is disrupted. The men can no longer gain access to the other world, which they absolutely need in order to remain in right relationship with the land and the physical universe. So out comes the wasteland. No longer were the cycles ensured. No longer was it possible to count on the balance and the wholeness which is once there. And so in this tradition, the hero is really the one who is going to somehow, through proving himself worthy, find his way back to the other world and reconcile. Kingship, again, with the goddess. You see, people think it's a story about knights going out to find this cup. And why would a women's movement, for example, like the Grail, take its name off of the story about these guys dressed up in armor and swords and all this stuff going out to find a cup? What does that have to do with us? What it has to do with us is that the irony is that these guys are all dressed up in armor and ready to do battle in order to find their feminine selves. They're in search of the divine feminine. That's what the cup is. Look at her. There she is. She is the container, the vessel that we've all come from. And so they're all dressed up to do battle, to find something that no battle can ever get.
Amen.
And then part of their path toward reconciliation is discovering that they don't need the armor, that there's something else that's going to get it for them. That the code of chivalry and knighthood, in fact, isn't going to get them very far. Something else is being added. And that's their path. As we said, the hero, that's where the story begins. You see, this is the backdrop. Crazy Ed is the elucidation. Now we're on to the story. The story is personal. Raised by his mother. Father was killed in battle. So were the brothers. The mother was determined. This boy is never going to see those guys, those knights. I'm going to keep him. I'm going to protect him. I'm going to keep him in my world. Echoes of that earlier era, where the women, it was the women's world. Echoes of that. One day, through the forest come the knights, shining armor. The guy wants to go. He's got to go. I got to go, Mom. You've been great, but I got to go. And he leaves his mother in a swoon of grief. He doesn't mean to hurt her, but he's just got to go. So he does. And he finds his way into a series of adventures, eventually to the Round Table. That's the journey. He goes off on his journey. She dresses him in funny clothes, though, so he looks like a fool, but it doesn't work. He eventually ends up at Arthur's court. And there's all of this need amongst the knights to get back to the other world, to find the Grail again in order to do away with the wasteland, which in fact they must even come upon in order to find the Grail itself. So that he sets out again. And crosses at that point, that's why I've got this in a circle here, he crosses into that other world. It's another dimension. And it's very hard to explain, except to maybe think of it as a dream world. The same way we go into dreams at night. Anything can happen in there. And a lot of what you find in there when the knight is in there, once again, how this is a female story, are all these women appearing to him and telling him things and harassing him and mocking him when he's being a fool, when he's not learning the lesson, trying to help him to transform himself enough that he can ultimately really pass over and bring everything back into balance again. So he's out there in the wasteland and eventually comes upon a castle in the midst of it all. And he enters the castle. And a whole series of mysterious things goes on. There's a wounded king. The wounded king always has a genital wound. Always. His wound is in the thigh. It is clearly a genital wound that has interfered with his ability to be sexual. And it is a wound that cannot be healed until this knight does what is necessary to help that to happen. And the king's wound and the wasteland are simultaneous. They're connected. When the king is healed of his wound, the land will be healed and made fertile again. So he comes into the castle. Everybody's really nice. There's the king. And all of a sudden, stuff starts to happen. What happens is what's called, and appears in most of the stories, the Grail procession. Here comes the Grail. Here comes the Grail. Watch out, folks. Here comes the Grail. But it appears in a very strange way. First you've got a sword, dripping with blood. And you've got candle holders, and then the entrance of a spear, also with blood. And a dish, sometimes with a head on it, a bloody head. Sometimes, not always, sometimes. Especially the Celtic version, that's where you see the head, because that's a reference back to an earlier story of the Celts about this king, because he's cut off, and he could prophesy that way, and he went with all his knights to the other world, and they spent 80 years together prophesying, and that's another great Celtic story. But that's what the head is. And then, of course, the Grail, which in the end is not necessarily defined as a cup. It's a shining object, it's a vessel of some kind. And it is being carried, and the vessel is always carried by a woman, the Grail Maiden. The goddess in her virgin aspect, in her maiden aspect. The goddess has three faces: the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And in the Grail myth, she's always appearing or disappearing in one of these many aspects. When she's out to harass him, she's the crone. She's a hag. And she likes it that way.
But isn't the crown also supposed to be the very epitome of wisdom?
Yes, that's it. And that's why she's the one who harasses him, because she's wise and has the wisdom to do so. But the cup, the Grail, is always carried by the Grail Maiden. Never carried by a man. Why? Because she is a cup of wine. Entrancing thing, this cup. It's full of light, aromas, and food appears, especially in the Celts. The Celtic thing is really about the food. All this food ends up on your plate. Whatever you like to eat best, that's what's there. References also to the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. And just a sense of bliss and joy and all of that. But meanwhile, you've got this suffering king going on at the same time, and often the sounds of women weeping. You don't see them, but the sounds of all these women weeping. Now, this is the test. At this point, the knight is supposed to ask the right question. In Chrétien, at this point, it's really, and this is the most enigmatic of the questions. Who does the Grail serve? Now, I don't know, it might be about the food, like who really got the best food. I don't know. But who does the Grail serve? It could be more than that. But the other question that also comes up is to the king. And it is, what ails thee? Why do you suffer? This is a question of compassion. Not the armor, not the chivalry, not the normally thought of heroic bravura. That's not what gets it. What gets it is a simple question of compassion. What ails thee? But he doesn't ask the question. He thinks the question. He thinks the question. He has the impulse. But he doesn't ask it. And do you know why he doesn't ask it? Because, I'll tell you, because when he left his mother and he went into the world of men and learned their codes and their laws and their ways of behavior, what do you think one of the first things he learned was? Don't ask questions. And let's not get into the one about the difference when men and women are lost in their car and what they do, right? Don't talk too much and don't ask questions. He was being a good knight. So that right back there, even in the Celtic version, there was something about getting off of the social codes, the cultural limitations, and going beyond them. That was being asked of the true hero. So he doesn't ask the question. He has a great night, though, great night, and sleeps very chastely with one of the may have been the Grail Maiden, I'm not sure, but one of the young women of the castle. They have a nice night, very loving, falls in love with her even. He wakes up in the morning and everyone's gone. He didn't ask the question. Everyone's gone. Castle's empty, no more grill, no more nothing, no more procession. And as he's leaving, he's going up the ramp to gallop out, and even as he's leaving, the thing is coming up and got to jump over. Things closed, gone. No more castle. Disappeared. These things can happen in the other world. See, he had passed into it, and now he was out of it. But what he finds out there is a young woman, once again. I don't remember if it's the maiden or the woman he was with the night before, but she says, "You're really a fool. You were supposed to ask the question, and you didn't do it." So now he's got to wander around for another period of time. And he has had more adventures, which eventually purify and build up his character. He learns the lessons. He meets a hermit. He studies. He does penance. He does various things. And eventually finds his way back again to the other world, to the castle, comes in and says, "What ails thee, uncle?" King is healed, or in some cases he dies because really Parsifal is now going to replace him. The land is healed, all is well. But in the Celtic version, that's just part of the cycle. You go back and it starts all over again. Because life is cyclical. In the Celtic version, the Grail is never completely attained. It's really about the cycle. There is a theory, and it's by Jessie Weston, and I put her on your bibliography. She emerged in the early part of the century, and when T.S. Eliot was writing The Wasteland, if you ever look at the notes, if you get through the poem and look at the notes, just about all of his references are to J. Weston, J. Weston, J. Weston. Here's what she says. She says that the Grail is really a narrative report on what was once an initiation rite. That the symbols, the stories of the Grail is really a remnant from what was once an actual initiation, and that's the importance of the Grail procession and the things that come out of it. All of these things were related to that original ritual. And that turned into story that went into the repertoire of the Welsh bards, which ended up in France and all of that. But really, it was a ritual. And these are remnants. And to notice that these are called the four hallowed, the four holy objects. The Grail really is part of these four holy objects. The sword, the spear, the dish, and the Grail itself. Once again, the four suits of the Tarot. The cup, the pentacle, which is in a dish, the spear, which has leaves growing from it, and the sword. These two, the sword and the spear, guess what they symbolize? The male principle, and the dish, which is also the circle, the female. So it's the presence of both the male and the female principle. And they're all associated with blood. They're all associated with blood. Blood, which is life. And interestingly, when we get to the Christian version, blood that then becomes associated with whose blood? Jesus Christ. In the Christian version, the Holy Grail is the vessel containing the blood of Christ that was caught by Joseph of Arimathea at the time of the crucifixion. And he got it, and he saved it, and he put it on an altar in his house, and the Romans found out about it and put it in jail. Huh? Well, I don't know if they stole it or not. He had family. But God and Jesus appeared to him and helped him to get out of jail magically, like the way the castle disappears, the jail walls are gone. And he was told to take that cup and your family to England. Go there to England. Get me on a boat to Glastonbury tour. So in the Christian version, we know the paradise, of course, was the original paradise. We know that story. We know that story of the fall. But then Jesus will somehow bring us back to that paradise and reconciling us to the sin of who? Eve. Eve. Once again, this theme about the usurpation of women and their primacy. Always, when there's a fall, the sacred object, the Grail cup, lands in the hands of those who become the Grail guardians. And this cup, this vessel, is passed down through the generations, through a bloodline. So that the hero is part of that bloodline, though he may not know it in the beginning. It becomes revealed as it goes on. Bloodline. So Joseph took the cup and his family through a series of adventures, ends up finally in England, where he establishes the Church of Mary. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, one of the historical forces at the time was the rise of the cult of Mary. Mary had not been a very big deal until then. But simultaneously with the rise of amour and the courts of love and a renewed reclaiming of the feminine, which the Grail also represented, comes Mary, which the Orthodox Church at that time also tried to suppress but was not successful. Especially where? In the South, which is where the Gnostic experiments were, but that's, I'm just imagining there might be a connection there, I don't know. So he establishes a church in honor of Mary, was always associated with the rose. At Glastonbury, Tours, which was supposedly the site of Avalon, and where that passing over could occur. This is like when you go to Europe and you go to a church and you find out that under this church was built an earlier church, and under that church was built a pagan site, or no, first a Roman site, and then under that site was a pagan site. And there's just these layers. They're all in the same place. They're built on top of each other.
The church was built on top.
Well, it was built in the same place where, first of all, the sacred wells were, and there's still the water, the Glastonbury, which a dear friend brought back to me in a little while. And it was also the place where Avalon existed in a parallel universe with the church that was built in Glastonbury. They were like occupying the same space. This is what I'm saying. It's like they're dimensions, and they're simultaneously occupying the same space, but in a different time zone that overlaps and then spins out. So that's that whole story on the fall, the Grail Guardians, and the Christian version. Now, here come the heroes. There are many streams of the Christian version. I will talk about the Cistercian because it's the most quintessential of the Christian version. It really points to the difference in the tendencies in that. All of the others, like Percival, this fool who comes into consciousness and does terrible things he doesn't mean to, but he does, and it's about growing into consciousness, about his wrongdoing, his limitations, and growing and becoming more whole. Okay. But the Cistercians decided we need a new hero, because our hero's got to be perfect. And he's perfect right from the beginning. And that was Galahad. He was the one raised by the nuns. Three nuns, number three. I don't know Trinity and all that stuff. Three nuns, three aspects of the goddess. You see a certain synchronicity among all these different things. You could just, like their thread, just unravel and follow through. All right, so he's raised by the three nuns. And he's perfect. Now, one of the main reasons he's perfect is... Slap those hands with a ruler. He doesn't, now Galahad doesn't have sex. Oh, he doesn't have sex, he's perfect. He's perfect. He doesn't have sex. You see, in all of the other Grail versions, all of these people were very sexually alive and active.
Not the knights, though.
Yeah. All of them.
I thought in chivalry that was what they gave up.
No. Only the perfect knight. What? The Knights Templar gave it up, Helen, and they were a model for the Christian knights. And the knights who would pursue the Grail in the Christian myth were asked, and being asked, to be chaste.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the primary values of Bernard. Chaste, charity, to be charitable toward all, even your enemies, and to really do that. And grace, to believe in grace and to be open to it.
And they took vows to remain that.
Well, some of them did, some of them did. For example, Gawain, who in all of the versions is a very earthy, sensual guy. You know, at one point he was confronted by one of the characters, might have been one of the women or one of the hermits. He said, you know, you're not going to get there if you keep this up, as he insisted on, you know, having women. He said, yep, you're right, you know me. He wouldn't change. But then there's Lancelot. Now it turns out, guess what? Galahad is Lancelot's son. Lancelot, who has sinned with Guinevere. Double sin. First of all, lust, seemingly. I mean, he broke through the call of chastity. was also betrayed as king. And one of those nights when he thought he was with Guinevere, something happened, a little trick played on him, and he wasn't. Really, he was with the daughter of the wounded king. Things happened. Stuff happened, and it was dark. So somehow the daughter of the wounded king ended up where Guinevere was. Might have been in the forest, who knows. And she conceived Galahad. Who was then taken and raised by these three nuns. And finally appears in the very beginning, in the season of Pentecost. Pentecost is very important in the Christian myth. That's when the knights come together. Pentecost is the time when the Spirit appears in tongues of fire and calls you out to your mission, and your quest, and all that stuff. So we all get together in Pentecost. Red was also the color of that time, also the color of blood. And it's at the season of Pentecost that the nuns bring Galahad to Lancelot to be knighted. He doesn't know it's his son. He is knighted, and then appears at court on Pentecost Sunday, sits in the perilous seat, is not swallowed, doesn't cause a big bang of splitting. He's the one. And it's on that very day that the Grail appears in all its light and calls all the knights forward to search for her. And effectively ends the Fellowship of the Round Table, which now becomes the Fellowship of the Grail. So in fact, the appearance of the Grail was the beginning of the end of Arthur's table and Arthur's kingdom. It was now passing on to a higher community. But of course they would all set out alone. So Galahad goes out, but Percival goes also, Bors goes, Gawain goes, Lancelot goes, they all go. And they say, Gawain isn't making it. But he's finding another castle, the castle of marbles, that has all these women in it. And he's come to liberate them. And he does that, and he's happy, and it's a good thing, but it's not as high as finding the Grail. It's a good thing. These women who are being held prisoner in a castle and need the knight to come is a reference back to the earlier Celtic Logrish and all these women who need to, that their knights must reconcile themselves with. Okay. But he's out of the running. Lancelot, who has been very sinful, very bad, discovers that he's being stopped because of that. And he chooses, unlike Gawain, he chooses to try to rectify his ways. So he goes into a time of period of penance and fasting and abstinence and study with a hermit. Puts on the hair shirt. Trying to find some way to get there. To reconcile himself with his own past and his own sins. I'm telling you in the eyes of the Christian version. Finally gets to the castle. He does. He gets to the doorway. But he can't get in. But through the doorway, he can see what is not a procession in the Christian, not in the Cistercian version anyway. It's a mass. Somehow the Grail procession and the Grail celebration is turned into the Holy Mass. So it's a mass going on. There is a sword, bloody sword. There are the candles, not the spear. There's the dish, of course, of the host and the cup. Four hollows are there. But he can't get in. And as the priest is holding up the host, what appears is a figure, probably the figure of Jesus, bearing down on it. It was so heavy, and the priest was like, couldn't bear the weight of it. And seeing that, Lancelot became so moved to try to help him that he was trying to break through. And we don't see him breaking through, but what does happen is he is shot through with lightning, burning on fire, and then when he wakes up, he's inside. What's interesting in the Cistercian version, neither Lancelot or Percival, who also gets there in his own way, or certainly Galahad, nobody ever has to ask a right question. There is no question. in the Cistercian version that needs to be added. But interestingly enough, Lancelot was moved by compassion, and it was that movement in compassion that got him through. Galahad never seems to have to do anything. He was born perfect, he lives perfect, and he gets to the Holy Grail, and like he sort of goes up in a blaze of ecstasy and he ascends into heaven, because really Galahad's supposed to be Christ. And all that he goes through in the story really shows this is the new Christ. Now here's something to understand, even as we see the limitations and what this is about, and women hating, it's clear evidence of this. Not hating, at least trying to alienate and trying to usurp. Because there is no Grail Maiden in this holy man. It's the priest who has now usurped the place of the Grail Maiden. But this is something to understand. Even this version is heretical. The whole Christian stream of the Grail was also heretical. It was also threatening to Mother Church. Because it was a mysticism that completely bypassed the apostles. It completely bypassed the lineage of the disciples, who were the founders and the lineage that gave birth to the church, which was supposed to be the authority. And there's a mysticism and a spiritual path that came through Joseph of Arimathea and his family that found this cup. Took this cup from the Last Supper, which was really the major teaching of Christianity, what happened at that supper. The church never fully accepted and recognized the Grail stories. It was always somewhere out there on the fringe, but for whatever reason, could not suppress it, may not even perceive all that was going on. It was so close to ritual. But that Christian version was also challenging the authority of the church, because it was still talking about personal path to divine revelation. Finally, there's the alchemical version. This is probably the one, once we are sufficiently entranced by the Celtic roots, this is probably the version that would be most interesting to us today. It comes from one person, Wolfram, in Germany, same period of time. And also follows the theme of paradise. Here's where the Grail came from in Wolfram's version. Very interesting. The Grail started out as a stone. And it was a stone in Lucifer's crown. Lucifer, which means light. It was a stone in the crown of Lucifer. And it fell out of his crown during the time of the battle in heaven between Lucifer and the other angels. Now, what was this battle about? That's what that sister told you back in Revelation. All right, try this one. The reason Lucifer rebelled was simultaneously with the creation of Adam and Eve. And God said, all of my angels will bow down and worship this new creation. Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve. Which God had placed above the angels. Now, it comes down instead of pride. No, I'm not going to worship man. No. According to Eschenbach and his Oriental sources, the reason Lucifer wouldn't bow down to Adam and Eve was because he loved God so much that he couldn't bow down to any other. a battle ensues, and you've got 1/3 of the angels with Lucifer. 1/3 of the angels with God. And then there's 1/3 of the angels that are neutral. They didn't go on either side. And when that stone fell out of Lucifer's crown, they caught it and they brought it down to earth. And that's the Grail in the alchemical version. Turns into a vessel, but not before it's a stone and reminiscent of the philosopher's stone, which is key to the alchemical path. You find the philosopher's stone and you can turn raw metals into gold, which is a whole path of refinement, which is understood as a spiritual journey of refinement of the soul into the highest, into gold, into immortality. It is an emerald also, it's green. Look at the power of fertility of the earth. Okay, so the stone comes down. This is paradise and the fall. Our hero emerges. Percival, once again. Basically the same story. Raised with his mother, who was afraid he was going to die like a father. Here's an interesting little twist, though. This father, who was in the lineage of the Grail Guardians, this father was a crusader in the Middle East. And he met a woman there. She was a black woman. And they gave birth to a child. And their child is black and white. Like the magpie, which is the bird that features very early in the story. The father, of course, is not very loyal, so the Crusades are over. He's gone. Goes back to Europe, marries another woman, gives birth to another child. And who is the second child? Percival. He gets in all of his battles, he's dead. Mother tries to protect the son. Percival does not know he has a brother who is a Muslim, a black Muslim, or a mulatto Muslim. Mixed of both black and white. The images of the story also begin right off, the dark and the light. And the idea is that nothing is pure. Right off, it's about no matter what you do, there will be good consequences and bad consequences. And all that you can do is keep moving toward the light. At one point, and this is really Percival's question throughout, independent of the right question, from the very time he's back with his mother, he says to his mother, "Mother, what is God?" And his mother answers, "God is a light brighter than the sun. And the brightest summer day." That's all. God is a light. So you just keep moving toward that light, knowing that nothing is pure. And you try to walk the middle way. Perceval means to pierce the valley, to go between the two mountains. You walk the middle way. The neutral angels bring it down through the middle. The Grail comes through the middle. This is very akin to the Tao, T-A-O, the Tao. He's very influenced by those Oriental meditation religions. So once again, the hero sets off. His mother, though he doesn't know it, behind him, dying of grief. She dies from the grief of his going, which, by the way, the other Percival also, much later as he goes through his journey of purification, that one of the reasons that provokes him is discovering that he has killed his mother. But here's the paradox, here's the dark and the light. He has to go. He must go. He should go. This is his path. But at the same time, his mother dies. Built into the journey in the third version, the alchemical version, is the search for truth and higher consciousness. That's the real focus. And things like that. And the third is really about coming into consciousness and truth. The story follows pretty much the same pattern as Chrétien, except that there's a way of following it in which we're constantly brought back to the idea of surrender and letting go. In this story, what emerges is that the knight, Percival, does not get to the Grail through his own will and his own striving. Over and over again, he lets go of the reins of the horse. And it is the horse, it is nature, that takes him to the Grail. So while in the Celtic version, there's nothing to distinguish between holy and nature. And in the Christian version, you've got very clear lines drawn between nature and the holy, and that's why you call it the Holy Grail. In the alchemical version, nature and spirit also become one, but acknowledging that they are not necessarily the same. And God, the divine, becomes immanent in all of nature. And it is the job of the hero to let himself go to it. The Christian would never let go of the horse because you never know where it's going to take you. You always got to hold on to the reins. It could take you to someplace bad. In the alchemical version, there's no bad, there is no good. It's just going on more and more toward the light. Just consciousness and truth. Now, the way this story ends, through the attainment, here's what happens. He goes through all of the stuff, doesn't ask the right question, out there in the quest again, and one day he comes upon this knight, who he ends up in a fight with him. And guess who it is? It's brother. It's his brother. It's his brother. And in the course of the fight, his sword breaks. The sword always breaks on these guys. The sword breaks, and then it's put back together again, it breaks it back together again, which is an interesting phenomenon. So the sword breaks. And this was the moment when the other knight, they don't know their brother, could have killed him, but he doesn't. This would not be fair. Throws away his sword. They sit down, they start talking, telling stories about their father. And guess what? They figure out, hey, we are brothers. We're brothers. So they can walk together back to the court. They start to journey together, and they're sent out once again, now this time to really find the Grail, and they do it. They go there together. He and his Moorish, half-black, half-white brother, together, end up in the Grail Castle. He asks the right question. His brother, Fearfish, that's the person of fish, I don't know, falls in love with the Grail Maiden. The carrier, the bearer of the Grail. He falls in love with her. First of all, he was already married to one of the maidens who he's been missing all that time. But Fearfish falls in love with the Grail Maiden, and he is so taken by that love, well, it's still Christian, right? He's willing to be baptized. He's willing to be baptized. And he does. And when he does that, the Grail appears. You've got this rhapsodic moment of everything coming together, and it starts to glow, and inside the Grail, words appear. There are words inside. And the words say, what do you think would be written inside the Grail cup? The Grail cup suddenly appeared in this blaze of light and ecstasy, and there were words inside. What would the words say? Drink this. This is it? Drink this? Is that all there is? Is that all there is? But this is what it says. If any Templar of the community should, by the grace of God, become ruler of a foreign peoples, Let him ensure that they are given their rights. Whoa. Justice. So, Theophige, the brother, the Moorish, now Christian, part Moorish, part Christian brother, and the Grail Maiden, with the Grail Cup, leave the castle, go to India, I believe. They go east again, together. First of all, now becomes the guardian of the land there. Everything was looking fertility. Interesting. Who marries the Grail Maiden? Who goes with the Grail Cup? Not Percival. His brother, who was black and white. Who was the Moor? Becomes now, with the Grail Maiden, the guardian of the cup. So they go back east, and they give birth to a child, and that child is Prester John. I don't know if any of you know about Prester John. But he became a mythical symbol of Christ, who was supposedly in the northwest coast of Africa, or India, and he had this kingdom, it was supposed to be a paradise, and everyone was trying to find it, including the Portuguese, when they set out on their great explorations, led by Henry the Navigator, who was supposedly a Knights Templar, and all of those guys, and now they're looking for Prester John. One big happy family. Amazing. And that's how that story ends. Now there's just one more theory I want to tell you about, and then we can have lunch. I told you about the ritual here. That's important. I'll refer back to that this afternoon. The ritual meaning the soul ritual. Someone says it's really a rite of initiation as told by somebody outside of it. There is a book called Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. I read it, or most of it. Very strange book. From the bibliography. I don't refer to it throughout. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to know about. But I don't include it because it's really not about myth. It really literalizes the Grail. There's definite Grail. And all of these events are not stories, they're not mythical, they're not poetic, they're not symbolic, they're real. That's not as much fun. But this is what he says. It's interesting. It's not fun, but it's interesting. Okay. Rise of the cult of Mary and the Virgin Mary, the Mary being associated with the Grail. They got it all documented. The Mary in this theory of the Holy Grail is Mary Magdalene. And this is what they say, that Jesus and Mary did it. That they were in fact married. Legally or not, we don't. But that they were a couple. And that Mary conceived a child. So that when Jesus died, and that whole bunch was in exile leaving Jerusalem, including Joseph of Arimathea, Mary Magdalene was one of them. And she gave birth to that child, and that child is in the lineage and the son of Jesus Christ. And that is the Holy Grail. And that lineage of Christ has been passed on right down to today. There are those who say they're part of that lineage of Jesus Christ. And that this was in fact connected with the Cathar and Albigensian experiment and the whole cult there. And that the Grail that was being kept was this bloodline of Christ.
Who was that book?
Was that supposed to be the Albigensian? Whose theory is that? What's the
These guys, what are the names? Now the book came out in 1982. You've read it, Helen?
Yeah.
It's very weird, but it's very documented, and it's an interesting thought. And they placed the Grail Castle in Montsalvage, which is in the Spanish Pyrenees, which was in fact the last stronghold of the Cathars. Supposedly, the story is that at the time of that last crusade, and when they were finally being exterminated, somebody escaped with the Grail. That is, whoever's in this bloodline of Christ. Now it's interesting only because there are those who say, and also with Wolfram's story, that really all of these symbols are really referring to some truth, some mystery that the Knights Templars brought back with them from Jerusalem. And that all of this is really about clues to this mystery that is so threatening to the church that they had to exterminate, or try to exterminate it. So all of these things could refer back to that, and in that book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, they make those connections between April?
Well, it occurs to me if there's actual real bloodline of Jesus Christ himself personally, the Pope is not very important. Didn't they have a movie out a couple years ago similar to this with Jesus and Mary Magdalene and all that? We're told to boycott.
Right.
Oh, that's what I was told.
What's the movie?
I don't remember the name of it.
It's all like
Sure, we weren't supposed to see anything like that.
How interesting.
I didn't remember the name.
See, what comes through the Christian version, even as enlightened and heretical as it was, is still the need to somehow alienate, first of all, usurp the women, usurp the role of the women, eliminate the goddess, or only let her appear in the form of a virgin, that is, no sex, that the intimate connection between sexuality and the stronghold of patriarchy. So Jesus couldn't possibly have had sex. He couldn't have possibly had a child. That would have been honoring the woman too much. Even when Jesus was born, Mary never had sex.
Yes.
It was somehow implanted in there. By the Spirit, by the Father, who was the ultimate creator of life, which also usurps the woman's role in the creation of life. She was just the vessel that carried it. It wasn't even probably her genetic code. So what's his genetic code? Does that...
We got a bloodline. We got now a family deck that we're not part of.
That's right.
All of this conspiracy. Right. Yeah. Right.
Okay, we're first Deborah and then April. Go ahead. That's right. She was just shouting.
Oh. Does that have anything to do with why priests are not allowed to marry?
It doesn't? Is that why celibacy and chastity and all of that is so important? Is that part of...
Till the 12th century.
Huh?
The 10th century?
Yeah.
It only became a rule in the 10th
Right.
century.
Once again, as the church affirmed and consolidated its hegemony and its power in a certain way of authority and began to interpret the Gospels and everything in those lines. See, one of the things that the Grail is, even in the Christian version, it was really about how humanity could become like Christ. A human being could be another Christ. This is heresy. That really, and it's affirming, and all these stories affirm that this is a journey toward evolution into spiritual beingness that makes us one with God and makes us, in fact, a manifestation of God.
But isn't that what Christianity is all about?
Well, maybe there's a way we can understand that now, but then it wasn't supposed to be that way. These are the forces that existed at that time that have helped to get us to that place. So that in one of these apocryphal books, in the Gospel of St. Thomas, those who've probably heard of the Gospel of St. Thomas, huh? There's been a lot of... I would like to get that to try to read it, but one of the things that he said, he who drinks, Jesus speaking, he who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I shall be he. They're the same. That you too can be a child of God. You too can be divine.